With football season upon us now, there's a lot happening in the news, so be sure to subscribe to my other channel, JG9 News, where I give you up-to-the-minute updates on everything happening in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, and I give my thoughts on everything taking place around the National Football League today. And now, on with our feature presentation. I'm going to say something that might seem like a hot take to some, but I don't care. I don't think it was a mistake for the Houston Oilers to fire head coach Bum Phillips after the 1980 season. Seriously, I think Phillips got the team as far as he could. His refusal to hire an offensive coordinator did the team in. The play calling was insanely predictable to the point where that offense would have been the worst in football if it wasn't for Earl Campbell single-handedly putting the team on his back and deserving MVP honors in 1980. It was time for a change, and if Phillips was going to be stubborn enough to not want an offensive coordinator, then that team wasn't going anywhere. However, Bum Phillips looked like freaking Vince Lombardi compared to the man they replaced him with. Because holy crap, this man you've been watching this whole time, Ed Biles, was absolutely terrible and might be one of the worst head coaches in NFL history. His in-game management was awful. He had a cheat code in Earl Campbell and ticked him off and had no idea how to use him, which seems impossible. The defense completely fell apart when he was the head coach, as he had no idea how to oversee that while maintaining his head coaching duties. His in-game management and his feuds with players were notoriously awful, and he was not a good leader in the slightest bit. The Oilers went from one of the better teams in football to a complete laughingstock under him, and the fact that he actually got 3 seasons to try and right the ship is remarkable, considering just how bad he was. Safe to say, Ed Biles did not contribute anything productive. However, you can contribute something productive today by hitting that like button down below, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. We post every single day about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL, so if you like that sort of stuff, then this is the place for you. So subscribe now and help us reach 70,000 subscribers. Thanks in advance for your support. But of the many, and I truly mean the many stupid moments that Ed Biles had as the man in charge of the Oilers, which seems like too many to count, this game against the Los Angeles Raiders in 1983 has to be near the top of the list. Because imagine losing a game in embarrassing fashion and getting smacked, then going to the press afterwards and blaming the officials for the loss, only for the officials to have actually gotten the calls you're complaining about 100% right, and only for you to offer no tangible or concrete evidence about anything that you're referring to. You're just whining and complaining for no reason at all, and you're supposed to be the leader and the authority figure in all of this, and you're failing miserably. Well, that's what happened more than 40 years ago, and it deserves a deep dive today, because this is the story behind Ed Biles, one of the most whiny moments by any coach in NFL history, and one of the dumbest moments of the Ed Biles regime. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, and just how stupid it was, we need some context to understand what was taking place during this game right here. It's September 11th, 1983. It's week 2 of the NFL season, and as we're just starting to get into the swing of things, we've got an AFC battle on our hands over the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum between the Houston Oilers and the Los Angeles Raiders. For the main team in our story, the Oilers, this felt like a must-win game for them. The Oilers already lost in Week 1 to the Green Bay Packers, losing 41-38 in an overtime thriller. And now, they had to face a Raider team that went 8-1 during the strike-shortened 1982 season and won their first game in 1983. And if they couldn't beat them on the road despite being double-digit underdogs, then they would fall to 0-2 with a game against the Pittsburgh Steelers coming up next. And safe to say, 0-2 is not a spot that you want to be in, as only twice in the last 3 full seasons, so excluding 1982 for obvious reasons, had a team started 0-2 and made it to the playoffs. Houston needed to go on the road and win this one against a great Raider team, or else they would be in serious trouble before the summer even officially ended. And as you can tell from all of these highlights, or should I say, lowlights of the game if you were an Oilers fan back then, this did not happen. Not at all. The Oilers got curb stomped by the Raiders, falling by a final score of 20-6, with the Raiders never trailing in the contest at any point. Houston's offense could get nothing, and I truly mean it, absolutely nothing going over the course of the 60 minutes, as the Oilers finished the game with just 7 first downs. They didn't even average 2 first downs a quarter. It's tough to win against any team with 7 first downs, let alone a team as good as the Raiders. And it's even tougher to win when your quarterback plays like crap, as Archie Manning, the longtime veteran who was on his last legs by this point, had an abysmal showing, going 6 for 19 and completing 31% of his passes, with 107 yards passing, 5 sacks for 37 yards, meaning that he only had 70 net passing yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a passer rating of 12.3, which is worse if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. Archie Manning completed 6 passes, which meant that Manning had more sacks and interceptions combined, with 5 sacks and 2 picks, than he had completed passes. You don't need to know a whole lot about football to know that this is abysmal. The Oilers lost the time of possession battle. They handily lost the yardage battle 386 to 223. And outside of one huge play, an 80-yard run by Larry Moriarty, the Oilers had just 2.8 yards per carry. When you have only 223 yards of offense, and 36% of that low total comes on one play, that's usually not a good sign. And it definitely wasn't here. All in all, it was a well-deserved win for the Raiders that shouldn't have involved a ton of controversy. At least, that's until Oilers head coach Ed Biles got involved. Because after the game, all the talk for head coach Ed Biles wasn't about what actually took place on the field with regards to the players and the plays themselves, but rather with the officiating. Because to say that this man right here, Ed Biles, was absolutely furious with the officials afterwards would be putting it lightly, as Biles made some interesting comments about the officials, I'll put it that way. Houston got penalized 8 times for 61 yards, and in the eyes of Biles, that was the reason that the Oilers lost. Not because they shot themselves in the foot, but because the officiating crew was that bad and was making up calls. Seriously, in a game where the Oilers got 7, may I remind you, 7 first downs, Biles was out here complaining about the state of the officiating and blaming them for the reason that the game was lost. Said Biles, "I'm calling the league office today to thank them for sending us a magic crew of officials. They must have been magic because of all the mystery calls they made. They were walking through Magic Land on some of those calls. The referees were magicians walking through Magic Land just making up calls. Hocus pocus, hold this, lost this, 10 yards this, or something like that. Where's Hermione when you need her?" Now look, venting about the officials is fine. Would I do it in a game like this where you play like crap, and where you could have had the referees that worked the Lakers-Kings 2002 Western Conference Finals working in your favor, and you still would have found a way to lose the game? Probably not. But we've all vented about the officials and some bad calls they made, so by itself, this is a non-story. Trust me, I'm not getting on Biles for just making those comments. However, when asked to elaborate on the officiating, Biles pointed to one play in particular that was an egregious call that set the tone for the entire game in his eyes. Let's take in at this play right here. It's first down, and the Oilers have the ball with just under a minute to go at the 12-yard line, down 13-0. Needing to get a touchdown to make it a one-score game and give themselves a fighting chance coming out of the halftime break. Archie Manning tries to escape the pressure, he gets outside the pocket, and he ends up throwing the ball out of bounds as he's getting hit. After the referees discuss it, they throw the flag on the Oilers for intentional grounding, which means a loss of down, and the ball is placed at the spot of the would-be sack. This holds any chance that the Oilers have at scoring a touchdown on this drive, as now they're faced with 2nd and long, and barring anything crazy, they'll have to settle for a field goal in the best-case scenario, which they would eventually get to make it 13-3, still maintaining a 2-score deficit. And Biles was absolutely livid about this call because in his eyes, it was an intentional grounding. And you're probably wondering, well, are the referees blind? He's 100% right here. For intentional grounding to be avoided when you throw the ball away, 2 things must happen. Number 1, the quarterback must be outside the pocket, and number 2, the ball must reach the line of scrimmage. Well, Both criteria are easily met here. Archie Manning is clearly outside the pocket and is clearly outside the tackle box, and the ball was snapped at the 12-yard line and makes it to the 5. So yes, the referees were drunk here. The referees were 100% in the wrong, and Ed Biles has a right to have a gripe about this and to be livid about this situation. Except, those weren't the rules in 1983. Those became the rules about a decade later, which are the rules we know of today. Because in 1983, guess what? Intentional grounding exceptions did not exist. You could not throw the ball away to avoid a sack. There had to be a receiver close by. Otherwise, it would be ruled intentional grounding. Doesn't matter where the ball is thrown, or how far it goes, or whatnot. If you don't throw it to a receiver, and you're getting rid of the ball to avoid a sack, it's grounding. No doubt about it. And when you look at it from the 1983 rules, and look at it from that lens, Ed Biles might be an idiot. Genuinely, he might be an idiot for bashing the refs for this call. There is no one even remotely close to the target that Archie Manning is throwing to. He's throwing the ball out of bounds clear as day, and no receiver is in the frame. I know Biles claims that tight end Chris Dressel was open, but guess what? Archie Manning wasn't throwing him the ball. The clear purpose of this play was to just chuck it out of bounds and avoid a sack. Do you see any intent to get the ball to a player on the Oilers? Not in the slightest bit. Even the commentators agree with the officials and break down why this is intentional grounding. Take a listen to Jim Turner, the color commentator, on the call for this one.
That's right. That's a tough penalty. You lose the down, and the assessment is made from where you throw the pass.
But it's a good call. He's feeling some pressure. There's no receiver. We'll watch it right at the point of contact there. There's no receiver down there. That's an offensive lineman. It's a good call by the officials.
Good pressure. That great pass rush makes great defensive backs.
So yeah, that's intentional grounding. If this was 2024, he'd have a gripe. But Ed Biles has no valid complaint here at all. May I remind you, that's how he let off the talk about the officials. He blamed the officials for being the reason that they lost this game, which again, was a game where they got 7 first downs. And then, he let off the talk by bashing them for a call that they very clearly got right. It's like bashing your teacher when you fail a history test and you skip class frequently. And the first thing you lead off with is that your teacher marked one of your answers wrong. Meanwhile, the question was, what day did Japan bomb Pearl Harbor? And you say, February 29th, 2006. Like, it's very clearly wrong. If that's how you're leading off, and your very first argument and biggest gripe is about a call that is clearly correct, then you're just delusional. Absolutely delusional. So we know that this man right here, Ed Biles, was clearly frustrated about that intentional grounding call. Any other calls he wanted to elaborate on and talk about why they were bad? Well, when asked about it, Biles declined. As he said, there were a slew of them, but let's just leave it at what I said. It was mysterious. Usually, that's code for, I don't know what I'm talking about. If you had that much of a gripe and a complaint with the officials, and you were already in the territory where you were on the topic, and you were going to get a stern talking to or a fine by the NFL, and your response when asked to talk about other calls to have a better argument is, you saw them, I mean, come on, they were bad. And that's code for, I don't have any other calls to really talk about. That's like when your friend asks you, what did you think of the newest album by this artist? And you say, it was good. Your friend asks you to name your favorite song off of it, and you say, oh man, well, there were a slew of them, but let's just leave it at what I said. It was a good album. Or your teacher asks you what your favorite metaphor in the book was, and you say, there were a slew of them, but let's just leave it at what I said. There were some good metaphors. I think we all know when someone is BSing, and when that BS meter goes off. And oh man, was it going off here. Ed Biles bashed the referees in the loss, talk about one call that halted momentum, which was clearly the right call, and wouldn't have given the Oilers the lead or anything like that, and then, when asked to talk about other calls, he had no answer. And this was the man that the Oilers seriously fired Bum Phillips for. This moron. This freaking moron. Making outlandish claims and then providing either no evidence for those claims, or the evidence for the claim actually proves the exact opposite. In the words of that fish from SpongeBob,
"Oh, brother, this guy stinks!"
As for what happened after the game between these two teams behind me right here, this game was a pretty bad omen for how the rest of the Oilers season would go in 1983. Now, the Raiders were totally fine. They ended up making it to the Super Bowl that year, and they ended up winning Super Bowl 18 over Washington in what is, to date, their final Super Bowl win in franchise history. As for the Oilers, Ed Biles resigned after an 0-6 start to the season, and the team finished 2-14, meaning that they had the worst record in football in 1983. Ed Biles ended his career losing 13 straight games, and after that 0-6 start in 1983, combined with the 1-8 season he had in 1982, he's got a legitimate case for being one of the worst head coaches of all time. Ed Biles was absolutely terrible, the Oilers were absolutely terrible, and everything about the situation was just really, really pathetic. So what's the moral of the story here? This is not saying that you shouldn't bash officials if they screw up and make terrible calls. Believe me, I would be a massive hypocrite to say that. However, there are a few lessons to take away from that if you are going to go that route. Number one, make sure said calls were actually incorrect calls and weren't perfectly called by the official to the point where literally every official with a working set of eyeballs would have done the same thing because it was so obvious. Number two, actually have evidence to back up your claims. And don't just say, well, I'm not going to dive too much into it, but it was bad, folks. It was really bad. When we not only have no idea what you're talking about, but when you already have no credibility and you're starting behind the 8 ball because the only call you seem to be able to describe in great detail as to why it was bad was the intentional grounding call that clearly was not. And number three, make sure you don't blame the officials in a game that you had no chance at winning. If you put up 7 first downs the entire contest, if your quarterback finishes with a passer rating around 12, if your quarterback can't find the end zone once, if your team can't find the end zone once for that matter, and if you just look anemic all game long, odds are it wasn't the officials' fault that you lost. Not even close. Believe me, there are games where I have no problem putting the officials on blast. 2 years later, in a 1985 game against Washington, the Oilers would have 3 touchdowns wrongly taken off the board by the officials in what might be the worst officiated game of all time, which we'll definitely talk about somewhere down the road. But this was not one of them. Not in the slightest bit. Because after this game in 1983, Ed Biles was really stupid. God bless Simone Biles for making people not think of this moron when they hear the last name Biles. Because Ed Biles was Ed Denials. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.